Could Israeli and Palestinian states live side by side in peace? That's what a two-state solution envisions, and more European nations now support that. But is it realistic? And is that recognition backed by real intentions to build a state for Palestine? I'm Aida Touma-Sliman, and today's Newsmaker is the two-state solution. It's been talked about for decades and seemed like the most feasible solution to the Israel-Palestine conflict. But for a list of often complicated reasons, not least a lack of support from Israel and its allies, plans for a two-state solution have never been implemented. That's left Israel to continue the illegal occupation of Palestinian territories, building the militancy we saw at its worst on October 7th. Israel, of course, responded with brute force, and now tens of thousands of Gazans are dead in what the International Court of Justice calls plausible genocide. The horror in Gaza has pushed a number of Israel's EU allies to formally recognize a Palestinian state. But does that bring Palestinians any closer to actual statehood? Here's a look.
In a historic move, 3 European countries, Spain, Ireland and Norway, have recognized the state of Palestine.
It
is the only way to move towards the solution that we all recognize as the only possible one, to achieve a future of peace, that of a Palestinian state living side by side with the state of Israel in peace and security.
They've joined 143 countries that already recognize Palestine, but many Western countries still don't. The UK says it's not the right time to do it, and the US reiterates its support for a two-state solution, but opposes unilateral recognition.
I have not heard the logic for how it contributes. What I can tell you is we believe the only way that you are going to achieve a two-state solution that delivers for both Israelis and Palestinians is through direct negotiations between the parties. That's what we've been focused on. That's what we've been driving towards.
The US and the European Union also want a revitalized Palestinian Authority to take over Gaza after the war. And on Monday, European and Arab foreign ministers discussed the future of a two-state solution in Brussels.
One of the suggestions and the proposals that the Arabs made us today was to consider the possibility of an international conference with the title of How do we implement the two-state solutions? Yes, this should be the purpose, not to discuss any more about the two-state solution, yes or not, because this has been enough discussed, but how to implement it.
But there are many obstacles, the biggest being Israel's outright rejection of a Palestinian state. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu previously said Israel needs security control of all land west of the Jordan River. Another contentious point is the borders of any Palestinian state. Many support the ones prior to the 1967 Six-Day War. But over the years, Israel has built thousands of illegal settlements in the occupied West Bank and maintains de facto control of most of it through military checkpoints and patrols. The Palestinian Prime Minister says the recognition doesn't mean the end of everything, but it is the right thing to do.
It's the beginning of a new phase. We will act responsibly as a state recognized by many countries to work diligently towards the realization of peace between us and our neighbors.
Yet Israel's relentless attacks on Gaza continue. Despite the recent ICJ order on Israel to stop the Rafah offensive, on Monday, missiles struck a tent camp hosting displaced Palestinians. The area was previously declared a so-called safe zone by Israel. The attack sparked a blaze in the camp and burned many Gazans alive. These scenes have prompted widespread condemnation. Germany has called on Israel to respect the ICJ ruling. French President Macron said he was outraged, and Italy says the Israeli attacks can no longer be justified. The EU has discussed sanctions against Israel if it does not halt Rafah operations, a move highlighting how Netanyahu and Israel are becoming more and more isolated from the global community.
So what does recognizing a potential Palestinian state really mean to Palestinians, and is a two-state solution truly possible? Joining me now to debate that and more are from Cork, Ireland, political activist and satirist Tadhg Hickey. From West Jerusalem, member of the Israeli Knesset for the Hadash, on the Hadash Ta'al list, Aida Touma-Sliman. And from Sydney, journalist and author of the Palestine Laboratory, Antony Loewenstein. Thanks all so much for being with me. Aida, I'll start with you. What do you think this recognition really means to Palestinians and to yourself for that matter? Is it a step toward actual statehood or just kind of a way for European leaders to ease their collective conscience at this point?
Well, thank you for asking. Actually, this is an issue that I'm holding a debate on it next week here in the Knesset in order to raise the issue. I think it's a very important step that was taken by the relevant government, especially the last three recognitions we had, because it is, first of all, telling the Palestinian people who are under huge suffer and a continuous massacre that the world is paying attention and the world standing, that some parts of the government are standing beside the Palestinian people and recognizing their right of liberation, of statehood, etc. Now, as to the legal situation, I think we have to also remember that there was a decision of having Palestine as a state, as an observer in the UN, which is another step. We would like to have more clear and a clear position about the borders of this state that will be recognized, about the possibility of real sovereignty over the land by the Palestinian state. But let's start in the beginning, saying that in front of those who are all complicit and taking part of the attack on the Palestinian people, especially Gazan people, but also in the West Bank, there are governments who are standing beside the Palestinian people and their right of recognition and pushing for a political solution. It's very important to say that the Israeli government starts to feel that there is pressure and there are people who are not accepting and nations who are not accepting their atrocities and the bloody war they are leading on the Palestinian people.
Okay, Aida. Let me turn to Antony, because recognition is important. It is a first step. But are these EU states ready to do the real work? Or is this, in essence, a way to condemn Israeli actions in Gaza, knowing that they really might not be able to do the actual job of sanctioning Israel and building a real Palestinian state?
I mean, the EU as a body is unbelievably not just not ready, but has no interest in truly sanctioning Israel. There are European states that are talking about sanctioning arms embargoes, etc. But as a body, the EU has been incredibly supportive of Israel for years. Let's not forget, the second biggest supporter of Israel in terms of weapons since October 7 has been Germany, the most powerful EU state. And I think also it's worth saying that although recognition is undeniably important, not least at a time where Palestinians are utterly under bombardment, particularly in Gaza, but also the West Bank, but any Israeli government, Netanyahu, there's a global obsession with him, and I understand why. He's the Prime Minister of Israel. But when his government falls in a week, in a month, in a year, all the likely replacements of him, Benny Gantz, Lapid, Naftali Bennett, whoever it will be, have no different views on Palestinian statehood than Netanyahu. My point in saying this is that without international pressure and sanctions and boycotts, the fall of Netanyahu and his right-wing extreme government is not the end of this problem. In fact, it's just the beginning. Because the Israeli population, the Israeli Jewish population, for decades has had no real interest in sharing the land and sharing sovereignty. And so I think that to me is a key issue. It's the Israeli people themselves as a major population that need to be essentially told through economic pain, frankly, that their situation is not normal.
And having said that, Antony, I mean, you still believe that the world is, in a sense, barking up the wrong tree anyway by believing in this two-state solution in the first place.
Look, obviously, the caveat to what I'm about to say is ultimately it's a decision for Israelis and Palestinians. But yes, for many years, I and many, many others have supported a one-state solution, which essentially means a state that, in my view, and I'm not alone in this, would be democratic. All citizens are treated equally, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, whatever it may be. There would need to be some kind of truth and reconciliation commission, not that different to what happened at the end of apartheid South Africa. There is no denying that in the last 8 months, any kind of prospect of one state, two state, any kind of peace feels so far away. No one can deny that. But ultimately, at the moment, I would say, speaking to some Israeli friends of mine, Israeli Jewish friends of mine who are utterly opposed to what's going on, they say still there is massive support in Israel still for this war. And the idea of sharing sovereignty with Palestinians at the moment for Israelis is utterly foreign. But yes, a one-state solution to me is the most democratic outcome. Hard to imagine now, but I think it's inevitable endpoint at some point.
Okay, Aida, I want to come back to you in a minute about that point. But let me get Ty involved quickly because, you know, the issue of Palestinian statehood and knowing that Ireland is one of these three powerful EU nations that have signed on to recognizing a Palestinian state, is particularly relevant to a country like Ireland that knows what colonization means and effectively exists today under a two-state agreement because the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland exist in two different political spheres. So explain how you see similarities with the Palestinian cause and what a two-state solution could be.
Well, I think obviously on a diplomatic level, as your guests have stated, it is significant. Of course it's significant. And if it means something to Palestinians at this, the most dire moment of need for them, then obviously I would welcome that. But I have to just give a bit of inside info on Ireland to anyone listening that, you know, Fine Gael, the leading party in the country, and that's where Simon Harris, the Taoiseach or our Prime Minister, comes from, they're quite good at the kind of optics, political optics and gesture politics, I would say. So whilst recognising Palestine as a state is very significant, it has to come, as your guests have said, with other measures like sanctions. We are allowing the US military to use our airport in Shannon. That's ongoing. We have a vibrant, lively trade relationship with Israel. We have an Israeli ambassador that Palestinian activists here have been calling to expel time and time again. I actually think it's embarrassing that the ambassador was called back to Israel because she should have been kicked out. She's literally parroting genocide apology, IDF talking points on national radio and television for months now. So I feel like the diplomatic element is important, but it has to come with a companion piece of all these other measures to actually make, as Antony said, Israel feel the pain, economic pain. That's key, because otherwise it's just gesture politics. And to go to your question, yeah, I think Ireland is an outlier in Europe. It understands colonialism, it understands dehumanization, and it understands Palestine. I feel like we are Palestine. But if we're going to offer solidarity with substance, there has to be sanctions on Israel. It can't just be a moment for Simon Harris and Fine Gael to go international on the news cycle that they've done something. They haven't done anywhere near enough. There's a live stream genocide going on, and this is only the tip of the iceberg.
And it's interesting, Tadhg, because we're watching, you know, in the run-up to this UK election, we're listening to UK opposition leaders, you know, even the SNP are making Palestinian statehood a campaign issue. Do you find that helpful? Is it at least giving more exposure to this issue in Ireland as well? Because it has become politically pivotal in an election as big as in the neighboring UK.
I agree with what you're saying, but I feel like Palestinian statehood has become an election topic because it's safe, it's easy. Whilst Israel is kicking up a little bit of a fuss, it's much easier to bring up Palestinian statehood when, as your guests have said, where is the state? Like, with the ever encroaching settlements, the endless new settlements, the idea of two states becomes more and more vague. And I think anybody who's clued into this issue knows that it will be much more important to make sanctioning Israel an election issue, be that here or in Britain. But nobody's doing that because, again, the political system here and the media elite across Europe and certainly in Britain and Ireland are, for reasons that we may or may not get into, are just beholden to US and Zionist interests. So I think the Palestinian statehood is the easier route, I think.
You know, Ida, I do want you to respond to what Antony had said also about the two-state solution. Just, in a sense, many argue it's even farcical because there's just no way Israel could exist now with a Palestinian state on its border, especially given who is in power. But we have this recognition of a state of Palestine that doesn't yet exist and increased diplomatic relations with the Palestinian Authority. And many Palestinians don't feel the people in power in the West Bank and in Ramallah represent them at all. So how does this help when there isn't yet a Palestinian Authority to be dealt with?
Well, I think, first of all, when we are talking about the two-state solution or the one-state solution, I have to say a one-state solution is existing, and it is an apartheid state, which is Israel, who is controlling the West Bank and Gaza, even when it was only a siege. And it was running a very clear apartheid regime. If we are addressing a one state, then someone has to explain how Israel will be enforced to dismantle the apartheid regime and create a democratic, secular, whatsoever. That will be a very nice dream that I will love to have. But I think we are not in a stage at this moment to speak about which kind of solution should be created. We are the new reality, this war and this bombardment of Gaza and the massacre that is going on is making it very difficult at this point to decide where is it going to be a two-state or a one-state. Meanwhile, I'm very busy in trying to create a situation where this war stops, first of all. This war has to end, and today before tomorrow, and yesterday before today. I think that we are back into the first step of talking about the right of survival, the right of life for the Palestinian, and the right for human dignity and self-liberation. On the same time, I think that whoever is saying the two-state solution failed is not revealing the real fact that there wasn't any time creation of a Palestinian state. We have never practiced the reality of having two states in order to say this solution has failed. But on the and I cannot accept to say that Israel will not accept to have a Palestinian state. The occupier cannot talk about do they accept or not. Those who are supposed to accept are the Palestinian people. And I think till now they did not change the whole vision of the national project of being liberated from occupation. I think it's premature, for my regret now, to speak about one or two states. We are back into the square of guaranteeing security for the two people.
But Ida, if I can just ask you kind of on a personal level, because you work as an Arab-Israeli member of the Knesset within the State of Israel, what would you ideally like to see? What is your vision? Do you prefer a two-state solution and you would prefer to live in an independent Palestinian state in the long term? Or would a one-state solution under the way Israel is administered, where all Palestinians are absorbed into the general Israeli population, would that work as well?
Well, first of all, I never relate to myself only as an Arab Israeli. I'm not an Arab of anybody. I am a Palestinian.
Palestinian Israeli.
Arab,
My
and I'm
apologies.
citizen
Indeed.
of Israel. That's okay. I'm saying this not to correct you, but to make a political statement. I'm a Palestinian citizen of Israel, and I am serving in the parliament in order to bring the voices. And it's an act of resistance to protect my own people who are suffering also from apartheid regime as citizens of Israel. I will never relocate myself, even if there will be a Palestinian state alongside Israel, because I'm in my homeland and I will continue to stay. I'm one of those Palestinians who the Zionist project did not manage to get rid of in 1948. I'm insisting to stay in my homeland and to try to create a more democratic and equal rights situation inside Israel.
Okay.
Now, as to what do I prefer? Well, as a communist, I would prefer no state. If you ask me, I will prefer a one state, secular, democratic for all of its citizens. But I'm also a realistic person that I can see that even the two-state solution, meaning giving up in the Israeli eyes, giving up 20% of the historical land of Palestine, the world is not willing to enforce them to do it.
Right.
Then are we going to wait till everybody is convinced of a one state?
Yeah, that's
it's up to the Palestinians.
We're down to our
decide.
last minutes. Let me get Antony back in the conversation, because that is where we're at right now. How long can this process go on? I feel we've taken, I'm going to call it even a baby step with this recognition from 3 new EU countries. But then we still haven't found a ceasefire agreement in the war in Gaza. There's just so many unknowns right now. And we're talking about Palestinians still not accepting anything other than the pre-1967 borders, which Israel has laid out right away. It's impossible. So where is this going? Oh, add to that also, we're not sure who is going to negotiate on behalf of the Palestinians. What do you see, Antony? Is there an end game?
Well, the end game, obviously, is the war needs to stop. I mean, that's a given. Now, obviously, how that happens, when that happens, we hope it happens today or tomorrow. But ultimately, I mean, as I say, I mean, I think we are in a situation here where, and again, speaking to some Israeli friends of mine recently who reiterate this and say that we are in, to some extent, unprecedented times. Last week, the ICC is calling for the potential arrest of Netanyahu and his defense minister. It's not going to happen tomorrow. It's not going to happen next week. We are in uncharted territory. You have many countries talking now about sanctions. This doesn't bring Palestinian statehood on its own, not at all. But it makes Israel pay an economic price. It's very similar to apartheid South Africa. South Africans did not wake up, white South Africans did not wake up in 1990 and suddenly go, oh, apartheid is terrible, we should end it. It ended because of massive international pressure over years. Civil society and eventually governments that essentially woke up to the fact that South Africa was unacceptable as an apartheid state. This is what needs to happen with Israel. And I think for the first time after this mass slaughter over the last 8 months, Israel's not going to be boycotted by America or the UK. We all know that. But for many other states, they will start talking about sanctions. It's happening now. They're talking about it. And I think until that happens, and Israel and Israelis are made to realize that they need to accept some form of Palestinian sovereignty, 2-state solution, 1-state solution. Again, I have my personal preference, but it's not up to me to make that decision.
Let me finish.
That's where it needs to go.
Okay. And let me finish with Tadhg. As an EU citizen, where do you want to see the EU public move on this? What kind of pressure can be brought to bear on their leaders to actually start instituting any kind of regime, sanctions regime or otherwise, that would make Israel feel the actual pressure?
I feel like the people have already spoken by coming out in their numbers and rallying, and the university encampments across Europe obviously began in America, but getting many in Europe as well. And I think the people are very much with Palestine. They're getting the news no longer from traditional sources like, you know, CNN and BBC and others who are, in my opinion, complicit with what's happened over the last 8 months. But they're now getting the news from their phones. And I think the people are so active that actually ultimately led to this announcement about statehood. But as I said before, it's got to go much further. And we've got to start realizing that this is not a Netanyahu problem. You know, like others have said, there's no one to take the reins that's going to suddenly be, you know, interested in Palestinian sovereignty, because since the foundation of Zionism, it's always been about Greater Israel. I mean, we need to wake up to the fact that the EU and the US have been talking about a two-state solution for a long time, whilst allowing settlements to increase. I mean, it's just crazy. It's either they're delusional or they're dishonest, and I wonder which at times. But we need to go right to the root of the fact that this is a colonial project, and colonial projects always displace and murder the indigenous people, and they always lie about their crimes. That's just been the history of colonialism. We need to treat Israel as a colonial state that wants all the land and wants the Palestinians either displaced or killed, whichever is easier. So it's really going to the root of Israeli society rather than just one supposedly maniacal leader.
Okay, Tadhg, that will have to be the final word for this edition of the Newsmakers. I'd like to thank all three of my panelists, as always, so much for being with us, and our viewers, of course, for joining us as well. Remember, you can follow us on X, and do be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. I'm Andrea Sankey. We'll see you next time.